Hello, my name is Kathy Hall, and I'm the Executive Director of Nebraska Statewide Independent Living Council. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I mean, this has been an interesting week. We've had some great presentations. I've learned a lot today, this week. The organizations that are involved considering doing one of these sessions every 2 to 3 weeks. So we hope you'll come to in future events. Anyway, I'd like to acknowledge the groups that have been involved in planning, which is the League of Human Dignity, Independence Rising, Easter Seals, Nebraska, Madonna's Community-Based Services, APSI, Nebraska VR, ADAPT Nebraska, Integrative Transitions, Nebraska Family Support Network, Nebraska Statewide Independent Living Council, Disability Rights Nebraska, University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at Monroe Meyer Institute, the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities, People First in Nebraska, the Arc of Nebraska, and Harper Self-Directed Services, and the Brain Injury Alliance of Nebraska. I have a few housekeeping rules. First of all, I just wanted to let you know there's a list of keystrokes for Zoom available in the Dropbox. And Melanie, this is going to be one of your last chances to sell the Dropbox. So if you could put it in the chat.
We're already there, Kathy.
Okay, thank you very much. We're asking everybody, if you're not presenting, to turn off your video or in your microphone. All sessions will be closed captioned. So if you click on the little arrow that's beside the CC button on your toolbar, you'll get a drop-down menu. And the very first thing is enable subtitles. If you have any questions for the presenters, please list them in the chat feature. We will have people monitoring the chat. Just a reminder, today is the last day to view the film Heart of Glass if you haven't got a chance to do that yet. And finally, all sessions will be recorded. If you don't want to be identified, you can rename yourself. This is done by hovering over your little square until the 3 dots appear in the corner. You click on them and you select rename from the drop-down menu and enter your new name, like Anonymous or John Smith or whatever you want to put. And now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for today, Shauna Dahlgren.
Hi, thanks, Kathy. So as Kathy said, my name is Shauna Dahlgren, and I am with Easter Seals, Nebraska. And this will just be a really short introduction. I'm just going to quickly introduce the two speakers for today. First will be Edison McDonald, who is the Executive Director for the ARC of Nebraska. And he will be talking about the importance of voting and some related issues. And then Brad Murins, who is the Public Policy Director with Disability Rights Nebraska, will be talking about some disability employment related issues, specifically subminimum wage after that. So Edison, I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself however else you want and start your presentation.
Okay, real quick, Kathy, I think I still need to be a co-host so I can share my screen. But while you're working on that, thank you, Shauna. My name's Edison McDonald, as she said. The ARC of Nebraska has advocated for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities since 1954. And we have been the backbone of a great many movements. Had to take away a squeaky toy from my dog. So yeah, we have been the backbone of a great many movements, from working to make sure that we were able to have home and community-based services, ensuring that there was special education, ensuring that the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, and all of those things require elected officials to make decisions. And those elected officials are elected by you, and they're elected in our elections every single year. And those elections have huge impacts on everyone's lives, but in particular, the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I just kind of want to walk through and talk about a few things. Number one, I want you to think about how elections affect your life. Ultimately, they have huge ramifications, from the water you drink to what sort of job you can have, where you can work. You can have senators who are more interested in workshops, and those who are more interested in integrated employment. You can have senators who are more interested in raising the minimum wage, and those who are not. You can have senators who are interested in workplace protections like paid family leave, and those who aren't. And so you really need to think about, there's so many ways that elections impact people with disabilities and how they're able to be employed. And I think, as we go and look to Tuesday, November 3rd is the election day. If you haven't voted yet, then you need to go and vote as soon as possible. If you can vote in person, we suggest that. If you still have a mail-in ballot, at this point, it's going to be way too late to be able to get that there. So you'll have to go and drop that into a physical drop box if you still want to get your ballot in time. Next, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of the framing for us. Really ideologically, we frame our focus on voting through our policy positions and self-advocacy, ensuring that individuals have that ability to make that decision and to be a part of the community. We all go and make these decisions that affect our lives in so many ways. Does that mean that you've got a county official that'll make sure that your community building is going to be accessible? Does that mean that you'll have a senator who will support and ensure that you're able to go and have an opportunity for employment or access to a waiver? Self-determination, making sure that everyone has that ability, the authority, the freedom that's given to us each under the Constitution to be able to vote. We'll talk about this later, but every American citizen has the right to vote. There are only 3 caveats to that. And ultimately, it falls down to a basis of human rights. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities face so many challenges and discrimination, whether it's in employment, housing, voting, transportation, you name it. There are so many barriers. So we want to make sure that everyone has access to that fundamental right to vote. Because as you'll often hear, if you don't have a place at the table, then you might be what's being served for dinner. Next up. So those three requirements we talked about, those three federal requirements: you need to be at least 18 years old, you need to be a resident of your community, so whatever district that is. So that could be like a US Senate seat for a statewide district, or it could be down to, we've got weird little seats like natural resource districts and public power districts here in Nebraska that affect things like the quality of your water, the quality of the environment. Are parks going to be accessible? The NRDs affect your electricity. Utilities are another huge issue that frequently we have members have challenges dealing with. And then you need to be a citizen of the United States. So then there are state requirements, making sure that you're not convicted of a felony crime. Nebraska has a 2-year rule that gives you basically 2 years where you can't vote after that. Then not be declared incompetent by a court. I think this is the biggest issue that we see in ensuring access for people with disabilities, is that ultimately, even if somebody else has your power of attorney or you've got a guardian, you still have that fundamental right to vote unless a judge has specifically said that you do not. And that very rarely happens. And then the last thing is making sure that you are registered to vote. The date to go and register to vote for this election is already passed, but if you haven't, you can go ahead and register at any point for the next election. I know Omaha and Lincoln have city elections that'll come up next spring. And then other than that, most other areas in Nebraska will have elections again in 2 years. Making sure to know those laws. If you do have any questions or issues, please feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here to do. If you want to give us a call at 402-475-4407, I'm happy at any point, and it doesn't matter if it's 7:55 on election night. I want to call, helping to make sure that you have that ability to vote. So we talked about those state requirements. So I want to make sure that we know kind of some of the fundamental rights that underlie our election protections. We have 3 major federal laws: Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Help America Vote Act, which is huge, especially in terms of providing funding for people to vote. The other thing that we have that we just passed last year was that we had some tremendous benefits from a bill, LB 411, that was an extension of LB 733 that basically helped to go and clarify a lot of the federal requirements in state statute. And it helped to go and make sure that we expanded and solidified some pieces. So some of the pieces that have been added in our regulatory standards, making sure that all polling places are accessible. If they're not, how help is available. In every polling location, there should be a sign indicating that help is available. And it can't be a tiny little button that's like this big and impossible to read. It has to be significant size. There has to be help available. And then another piece that was really exciting that we passed that year was that we passed new funding for the new Easy Mark machine. So some of you may be or easy vote machines. Some of you may have been familiar with the AutoMark machines that were the old assistive voting devices. They're gigantic. They weighed probably about 50 pounds. And then, it just made it really hard for folks to be able to even get those in there. And to make sure that their vote was private. Now, these new easy vote machines are tiny. They're like tablets. They are far more reliable, quicker, easier to use. And they also have privacy shields. So then just like everyone else goes into the ballot box, and I know lots of folks really value that privacy, being able to vote for whoever you want. And so we fought really hard to make sure that now everyone who votes at those easy vote machines will have those protective devices too. Next up. So kind of the overall societal standards that we've seen a significant decrease in voting in people with disabilities from 57.3% in 2008 to 55.9% in 2016. Luckily, we've seen a bit of a turnaround. And I think some of the organizations on this call deserve some of the credit for that. I know Kathy Howell has been a constant advocate for voting rights here in Nebraska for people with disabilities. And then the next piece here, I have down that in 2016, there was a Government Accountability Office survey that took 137 polling locations and assembled the data from across the nation out of 137 polling locations. Well, thanks to our work and the help of Civic Nebraska and Common Cause Nebraska, in 2018, we were able to survey over 220 sites, not nationwide, just in Nebraska. So we have a huge collection now of data. And on election day, we will have over 140 volunteers who will be helping to monitor polling locations across the state, helping to go and direct folks to the correct information sources and connect us if you do need help. So we'll have volunteers all across the state. If you do need help, reach out to us. We'll have a direct line in with a table full of attorneys ready to go and talk to the county clerk or the Secretary of State or the local polling judge, whoever needs to be talked to make sure that you have the right and ability to be able to vote. Some of the typical barriers that we see include physical barriers, especially bad ramps or ramps that aren't wide enough, bad parking. The worst one in Nebraska, according to the data that we found, is doors that are hard to open without grasping, pinching, or twisting if you don't have full dexterity. The second one is voting privacy. As I said, I'm really excited because we do now have that directed. The other thing that we have is that all of the polling monitors are directed to make sure that those easy vote machines are going to be facing a wall and not facing outwards so that you do have that privacy. Those voting machines, I think we're going to see a lot fewer issues this year. I expect with these new machines that they will be turned on and that they will be working. Hopefully, we'll see. It's the first year, so not completely sure, but I'm hopefully optimistic. So then we talked a bit about this earlier. Can you vote? If you've got a guardian, can you vote? Yes. If you have a conservator, can you vote? Yes. Power of attorney? Yes. If you can't read, then you can still vote. If you can't see, then you can still vote. I had one young man who recently tried to vote and needed to go and sign an X that was his typical signature that he used. And the county commission tried to challenge that. However, he was able to vote. Next up, and sorry, I'm cruising a little quick here because I don't want to drag on too long. There are also a large variety of laws that impact your accessibility to voting. One of the biggest concerns that we're seeing is shifts in terms of vote by mail. That has been a huge tool for people with disabilities if they can't access locations, and making sure that everyone has that protection. If you do need help with any of that or figuring out any of that, again, please feel free to reach out anytime this weekend up until the 3rd. We'd be happy to help. We also are always concerned about pushes for voter ID because people with disabilities typically may not have an ID. Because, you know, if you're not driving, then you may not have one typically. We're also concerned this year, especially about some new issues with COVID. Number one, safety. So one of the biggest things that you can do on election day, if you want to vote and be safe, is that curbside voting is available. So in the new regulatory standards, every polling location will have a yard sign that will go and have a phone number on there that you can call to have the election judges from that location go and bring you out a ballot. And then, sorry, excuse me. And then the other thing that we see is, 1 second. Dogs. The other thing that we see is significant limits in terms of making sure that there aren't a whole bunch of condensing of voting locations. So what can you do if you want to get involved, if you want to vote and you need help? Reach out to us. We'll keep you in the loop about what sort of election policy is going on. What can you do to make sure that you know the laws, that you know how to go and stay engaged? And if you follow us on social media or our emails, we'll keep you in the loop about that. And we're going to skip these. The last thing I want to ask y'all to consider doing is to join our election protection team. Here's the link to go and do that if you'd like to join us. If you need other resources, here's our list of resources that you can go and use to kind of go and get some quick, easy information about elections and about election protection. And with that, I guess I will hand it off back to Shauna. Yeah.
Thanks, Edison. I was just gonna take a quick second and let you know that there was actually a question in the chat for you.
Sure.
So Dee is asking where she might call for a ride to the polls. Do you have information about that?
Yeah, it's gonna depend on where you're at. Here in Lincoln, let's see, probably, yeah, Dee, I'm thinking probably give Civic a call or give us a call, and one of the two of us will work on helping you figure that out.
And then a second question from Jared is asking, when will curbside be available?
Curbside's available for all of Election Day. So November 3rd from polls open to polls close.
Okay. And then there was a couple of comments. Holly mentions that in Iowa, you can still register to vote in person on November 3rd. If there's any people in Nebraska watching this. And then Melanie says in Omaha, both the city bus and paratransit is free on election day. So if anybody's can use those services to get to the polls, it would be free on election day.
Also in Omaha in particular, there's a lot more accessibility issues and programming. I'll also refer you to 100 Black Men. They run a program. And then you'll also see a lot of campaigns running programs, especially because the Department of Justice has seen some issues, especially in North Omaha in terms of voting accessibility, especially in 2 of the precincts in North Omaha. They're 2 of the furthest distance precincts, and it makes no sense looking at the map.
And then one last comment, D mentions in Lincoln, currently bus and handy van are free, but you must call early for the handy van.
Okay.
So
Great.
if anybody can utilize any of those resources, hopefully they'll be helpful for someone.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Edison. That was really good information. Hopefully helpful for people. So now we'll go ahead and turn it over to Brad Mearens, who, as I mentioned earlier, is the Public Policy Director for Disability Rights Nebraska, to talk about disability employment and subminimum wage.
Great.
I think you're still on mute, Brad.
I probably am.
There you go.
All right. So let's see if I can share my screen here. Oops. Kathy, can you make me a co-host again? I am not being able to share my screen. Well, anyway, while we're doing that, my name is Brad Mearens.
Today's to our co-host.
What was that, Kathy?
According to my information I have, you are a co-host.
I get those says host disabled participant screen sharing. That's the message I get when I try to share my screen.
Okay, well, in one place I checked, it said you were. Another place said you weren't, so I just made you co-host.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, sweet. Great. So again, my name is Brad Mearens, and I am the Public Policy Director at Disability Rights Nebraska. Disability Rights Nebraska is the designated protection and advocacy organization for persons with disabilities in Nebraska. Our main charge is to advocate for and protect the rights of persons with disabilities here in Nebraska. And we are fortunate that we have a strong tradition of public policy and legislative activity in our organization. That's where I fit in. So we're also looking at helping to devise beneficial public policies for persons with disabilities here in Nebraska. So what I want to talk to you about today is to raise awareness with you about an issue that is garnering more and more attention on the national level, and that is the issue of sub-minimum wages paid to persons with disabilities for work. Now, I thought I might deviate a little bit from my traditional presentation and start with a little video first, and then I'll go into my presentation. And I got another video toward the middle, I think that will be helpful for you to really kind of help that idea and the concept sink in. So the Disability Rights Washington out on the West Coast put together, they have a video sort of arm called Rooted in Rights. And they have produced an hour-long documentary on the issue of sub-minimum wages paid to persons with disabilities. They've broken up the hour-long documentary into 6 different chapters or 6 different videos, and they all have them uploaded to YouTube as a YouTube playlist from Rooted in Rights. So I want to show you the first chapter of the series, and then I will show you a little bit of chapter 2 later on during the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to the movie. So here we go.
Listen for this voice for a description of important
Brad, you need to turn up the volume.
The skyline of Rochester, 970 per hour.
My name is Melanie Oyer, and I work for the Center for Disability Rights. I met Gloria about 2 years ago. She is one of my clients.
A photo of Melanie and Gloria together smiling.
She works at a site for people with disabilities, sorting items, working with
Brad, just so
little
you know, this
objects,
is in
putting
the PowerPoint.
plastic parts together.
Gloria Marrero uses sign language.
I worked there for 8 years.
Brad,
Her
you
work
gotta
always
stop sharing your
public
PowerPoint.
She's reliable.
What's that, Kathy?
You need to stop sharing your PowerPoint and share the YouTube video.
Okay. All right. All right.
Can't do two things at once.
She's friendly. She's always
Is that right? Was that working is that working, Kathy?
It said you can't have two things sharing at the same time.
Okay. All right. Well, and I will just, is this good? Is this working?
on time. She never misses work. Yeah, they tell me I'm a good worker. My boss loves me.
Can sort of hear it, but we can't see it.
Specific categories that they evaluate her on. And the best is 4 out of 4. And she received a 4 out of 4 on about 20 different categories.
Gloria's work records.
And one category, it says independent work rate, and it says excellent worker, on average makes $3.50 an hour. Gloria is the only excellent worker that I know that makes $3.50 an hour. No, it's not fair. In my opinion, the only reason why an employer would pay somebody so low that's an excellent worker is because it's legal.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
President Franklin Roosevelt.
My friends,
Families gather around the readings to listen.
after many requests on my part, the Congress passed a Fair Labor Standards Act. That act sets a floor below wages.
I cannot see the video. I can only hear it.
Of the blind, the Fair Labor.
What was that, Mary?
Nobody can see the video.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, then,
Stop sharing your screen. You might have to
But
share
you
your
look,
screen.
you look really cute out there.
all right. Hold on. Let me,
Maybe try sharing your screen and just having the video on it, not the PowerPoint. There you go.
Standards Act, a civil rights
Now we
statute,
see it.
and it provides protections to Americans in the workforce. The minimum wage guaranteed was revolutionary. If you were going to take a job, you know where the floor is.
It is the most far-sighted program for the benefit of workers that has ever been adopted, here or in any other country.
But the minimum wage is offered to everybody, except for people with disabilities.
Brad,
yes.
we do have some time and we've had a request. I think we have plenty of time. So we've had a request. If you could start the video over, would you mind
Sure.
that?
Sure.
Okay.
The following film features audio description. Listen for this voice for a description of important visuals and titles that appear in the film. Rooted in Rights logo. Chapter 1, Excellent Worker. The skyline of Rochester, New York. Minimum wage, $9.70 per hour.
My name is Melanie Oyer, and I work for the Center for Disability Rights. I met Gloria about 2 years ago. She is one of my clients.
A photo of Melanie and Gloria together smiling.
She works at a site for
Hey, Brad, can you take it off the mute, please?
No, they make $3.50 an hour.
Brad, we need to have you share the computer.
Okay.
In my opinion, the
Sound.
only employer who would pay somebody so low that's an
What was that? What was that, Mary?
It's good now. You just needed to
It's
unmute
good.
yourself.
Okay.
excellent worker is because it's legal.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
President Franklin Roosevelt.
My friends,
Families gather around the radios to listen.
after many requests on my part, the Congress passed a Fair Labor Standards Act. That act sets a floor below wages.
I'm Mark Bono, president of the National Federation of the Blind. The Fair Labor Standards Act is a civil rights statute, and it provides protections to Americans in the workforce. The minimum wage guarantee was revolutionary. If you are going to take a job, you know what the floor is.
It is the most far-sighted program for the benefit of workers that has ever been adopted here or in any other country.
But the minimum wage is offered to everybody except for people with disabilities.
I'm Cheryl Bates Harris, Senior Disability Advocacy Specialist with the National Disability Rights Network under the Fair Labor Standard Act, which was passed in 1938. There's a section of law called Section 14C.
14C certificates.
Employers who have a 14C certificate pay people with disabilities less than the minimum wage simply based on the fact that they have a disability. So sub-minimum wage is a term we sometimes use to describe paying people with disabilities a different wage from everybody else.
It's intended to be able to give employers the opportunity to hire wounded veterans returning from war. That provision of law was little known and little utilized until sheltered workshops began to flourish in the 50s and the 60s. Sheltered workshop is a congregate facility where people with disabilities go for a period of time during the day. It's very boring. It's shredding newspapers. It's counting nuts, bolts, and screws for packaging. They started for the right reason 50, 60 years ago because parents were keeping their children out of institutions and needed somewhere for them to go during the day. But they've since become an outdated model of segregation.
2016, 241,265 people with disabilities are paid less than the minimum wage.
Statistics show that people with disabilities are at least twice as likely to live below the poverty line. And poverty, I do not believe, is the American dream that we have for our sons and our daughters or our family members with or without a disability.
Bottom dollars.
Share the full film.
Okay. Stop share. Now let's go back to my presentation.
The link to the video is in the chat box.
Great. All right. Now, if I can get back to sharing my screen here. Okay.
Yay.
All right. So just to recap, President Franklin Roosevelt in 1938 signed into law the Fair Labor Standards Act, which sets that minimum wage for employees. So the federal minimum wage for employees right now is $7.25 per hour. But the states can also set up their minimum wage laws if they want to go higher than the feds. And so Nebraska's current minimum wage is $9 per hour. but the Act's minimum wage does not apply to all workers. Section 14C of the Act, like I said in the little video, establishes a special minimum wage for individuals with disabilities. So if an employer has a 14C certificate from the U.S. Department of Labor, they can pay people with disabilities less than the minimum wage. So so how do you determine what the sub-minimum wage is? Well, the 14C certificates in law lays out a productivity test that determines what that sub-minimum wage is. And there's three sort of parts to this evaluation. The employer times 3 employees without disabilities to do a certain task. Then they time an employee with a disability to do the same task. And then if the employee with a disability completes a fraction of the work as compared to their coworkers without disabilities, they are paid what that fraction is. And so, for example, and they'll show this later on in the video, if you can make 10 widgets and the person with a disability can make 5 widgets in the same amount of time, that person gets 50% of the prevailing wage for that job. And here's the other sort of ironic twist. And I've got another video that will demonstrate this a little clearer. But workers without disabilities get minimum wage regardless of their production, because they are still subject to the Fair Labor Standards Act. Persons with disabilities who cannot make 10 widgets but can only make 5 get paid whatever that fraction is, regardless of what their cohorts or their coworkers produce. And it's been reported that the Department of Labor does not necessarily do consistent on-site inspections to ensure that the test of how many widgets a person can make is fair. There's been on the Rooted in Rights video in chapter 2, they talk about how there were some physical setups and regimes that were an impediment to an individual to complete their job. But those impediments and those barriers did not get factored into the rate at which that person got paid. Now, bringing it back to the law. So not only does the federal law allow for a sub-minimum wage to be paid to persons with disabilities for their work, but Nebraska law doesn't do anything much better. So for example, in the Wage and Hour Act, statute 48-1202, it talks about any person who directly or indirectly is receiving any federal, state, or aid or welfare, or who's physically or mentally disabled and employed, they can receive a wage at a level consistent with his or her health, efficiency, and general well-being. I don't know what that is. Like, how do you make a wage that's consistent with my health? I don't know what that means, but I think the key word there is consistent with his or her efficiency. That gets us back again to the same sort of idea under the 14C exception and allowing for employers to pay a sub-minimum wage based on what a person can produce. And then secondly, in statute 48-1203, they will employers have to pay a $9 an hour minimum wage. But there are caveats to that, and as I've shown in the section above. Now in Nebraska, this is a chart which identifies those individuals or those companies who have applied for or have been issued or are pending for their 14C certificates. So on the left, you'll have the employers, the city, if their certificate has been issued or is pending, and then I totaled up the number of persons that are paid sub-minimum wage here in Nebraska, and that total is 302 people. And that is accurate. That's taken from the U.S. Department of Labor's website and is accurate as of July 1st, 2020. So I want to show you another little clip of the Rooted in Rights video that I thought was most pertinent for this part of the presentation. So let me get to that section here. Okay. Full screen. And here we go.
Allows employers to pay individuals based on their productivity. Mark Riccobono from the National Federation of the Blind.
The idea is to compare the productivity of a person with a disability to a non-disabled.
Can you turn up the volume, Brad?
The graphic illustrates time spent. Let's say that we were a widget manufacturer and they test 3 individuals without disabilities and they can make 9 widgets an hour, 10 widgets an hour, and 11 widgets an hour. Then the expectation would be that the norm would be the average of 10 widgets an hour. A person with a disability trying to make widgets and he only makes 5 widgets in an hour. He would therefore be paid 50% of the prevailing wage since he was only producing 50% of the work. But if a non-disabled worker also only made 5 widgets an hour, he would still be paid 100% of the wage because he benefits from the minimum wage protections.
What happens is people with disabilities are held to a productivity standard while everybody else is guaranteed a wage regardless of how productive they are or not. So basically every person with a disability has to hustle or you're out of luck, and even when you hustle, you're not guaranteed the minimum that everybody else gets.
Pamela embroiders a pillowcase. Barbara.
When they tested our clients, they didn't use the exact same testing conditions as for people without disabilities, so that test wasn't fair.
I got held up by people slowing me down on the other side. I had to wait for them to bring jigs over to me so I could actually put the pieces on the jigs. Sometimes they'd saw around, not bringing the jigs over so the job could be done. I was relying on other people. I don't feel that I was tested right.
The Department of Labor has responsibility for monitoring the 14C certificates, but there are a lot of them out there. There are a lot of people with disabilities, and there's a limited amount of capacity at the Department of Labor to monitor. So it's the employers are expected to fill out the papers and expected to do it correctly and expected to tell the truth.
From what we found out, the Department of Labor basically just looks at the paper certificate and doesn't do any further investigation. That's why things have just continued the same way they've been for decades.
Pamela cleans her apartment as her cat watches.
When I'm working, I feel that I should be paid as an equal person.
Share the full film in your community. Post a screening. BottomDollarsMovie.com.
Okay. So what is being done? Well, there's been state action. That's probably where a lot of, if not the most of the work around dealing with or working toward ending a sub-minimum wage has been done. So there have been at least 4 states that have eliminated the option of paying persons with disabilities a sub-minimum wage. Listed here, I have New Hampshire, Maryland, Alaska, and Texas. Oregon and Nevada are going to have, will be phasing out or eliminating this sub-minimum wage in the future. So they haven't really done it yet. That's why I didn't want to include them on the top on the list of 4, but those are in the works. Okay. On the federal level, there's been a little bit of action on the federal level. HR 582 and Senate Bill 150, Raise the Wage Act, was introduced in 2019, and it includes scheduled increases to the minimum wage for more than 100,000 individuals with disabilities working under Section 14C. And it would require the Department of Labor to stop issuing these certificates when the bill following the bill's final wage increase. Now, this bill was passed in the House and is now waiting for the Senate. The second activity that on the federal level has been HR 873, that's House Resolution 873, and Senate Bill 260, the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act of 2019. And that would phase out the availability of the sub-minimum wage exception and would help entities that currently use the 14C certificate to transition to paying a full minimum wage. And this bill on January 29th, 2019 is still sitting in the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. So that, I think, will give you a good sense of what this thing is and what happens to persons with disabilities and why they are still continued to be paid. Some of them are still continue to be paid a sub minimum wage. I think one of the most, I think, illustrative, or at least one that stuck out in my mind, vignettes in that Rooted in Rights video. And they were talking about people, people will work, a full 20-hour week or so and get paid like $3.10. Now imagine if you put in a full 2 weeks worth of work and got paid like less than $10. Is that fair? Probably not. But that's what happens to thousands on the national level and hundreds of persons with disabilities here on the state level, just because they have a disability. And that kind of wraps up my little quick jaunt down sub-minimum wage path. I'd be happy to answer any questions or entertain any thoughts.
This is Shauna, Brett. I do see one question in here from Mary, is asking if people who get food stamps or any other public aid can be paid less as long as they have a disability. Basically, does what you were talking about, does that mean that people who get food stamps or any other public aid can be paid less as long as they have a disability?
That's in Nebraska. You talked about the Nebraska law. It looks like maybe Walmart people could be paid whatever.
I think that, according to the letter of the law, that sounds about right. Now, I don't know if that's I can't say that that's the practice or the policy of the state, but that's kind of the way I read the statute anyway. But again, I think it just kind of, again, supports the idea of the 14C federal minimum wage, sub-minimum wage, 14C action. And I think it's a combination of both the federal and the state. If the state, like those four that I've listed, have renounced the practice of sub-minimum wage, then that's going to be that can be really done regardless of what the federal statutes and the 14C exceptions are there. So I think that we need to look at the state law and state statutes that help support this idea, concept, or the action practice of paying people with disabilities less than the minimum wage just because they can't produce as much as their non-disabled peers. But yeah, that's kind of how I read the law. Now, I don't know if that's actually if they follow it, but yeah, that's kind of how I read it. But that's a good question. And that's a good question. I mean, that's a good question. I would, my suggestion is that might be a good conversation for you and your state senator to kind of run down that rabbit hole and to see if that's the practice and to see if that's really how the agencies and the Department of Labor see it here in Nebraska.
What was that law again?
You
don't have to go through it. I'm just
Statute 48-1202 and -1203.
Thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions in addition to what's already been posed?
I would, again, I would really strongly encourage folks to go and watch all the chapters of the Rooted in Rights video. It's excellent. And I think it does a really good job of not only explaining what the law is and what legal mechanisms are there to allow persons with disabilities to be paid sub minimum wage, but I also think it does a really good job of providing a real world picture of what it means to be paid sub minimum wage and to be paid a discriminatory level of compensation. And I think it really drives home the point, and that it provides that, on the ground perspective that you don't always get with the dry, statistical reports in a journal or in the paper or on a website. I think it really drives home the point when you can hear from people who have been in those sheltered workshops and who have been in there for 18 some years, while they're still, oh, we're training this individual to go get a job. Well, if you're training them, it shouldn't take 18 years to train them to do a job. So a lot of times, these workshops and other entities like that kind of rest and move on inertia when because there hasn't been much change, and there's not a lot of folks that are coming to bat for folks that are in the workshop. So it kind of runs on inertia, and they kind of keep doing what they're doing under the guise of training and preparing folks for competitive integrated employment. But then they just keep on doing what they've always been doing. And then it 1 year goes to 3, goes to 5, goes to 8, goes to 18, and those sort of things. And they're still paid a sub minimum wage.
Brad, there is one more question in the chat box. So Melanie is asking if any employers have ever spoken out against this practice as a support for their workers.
I don't know if the employers that are listed, but I know that in the Rooted in Rights video, I think in one of the subsequent chapters, the point that they make is that a lot of these workshops, sheltered workshops, and the areas in which people with disabilities are paid that sub-minimum wage are contracts with large multi-million-dollar corporations, right? That make millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars and have contracts with these agencies or sheltered workshops that then get the contract to do janitorial work, or like they were saying in the video, to take apart, screws and put them together, or shred paper. And they pay the workers the sub minimum wage, but the parent company or the person that's giving out the contract is worth millions. And if not the subcontract, or if not the contractor, also is a big corporation that has these sub minimum wage shelter workshops in their business practice and business model. Now, in the video, they note that the Goodwill of Central Nebraska out in Grand Island was one of the entities that ran a shelter workshop and paid sub minimum wage and was highlighted in this Rooted in Rights video. Now, I contacted them several years ago, and found out that that this Goodwill ended the practice of paying sub minimum wage for their disabled employees. So I know that there are some organizations that have come to that realization and are or have made the switch. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think that the earlier numbers of persons employed by those employers that are paying sub minimum wage was a lot higher in 2018 than what was reported in July 1st of 2019. So I think there are a decrease in the numbers, but it's still pretty significant. I mean, it's several hundred. So I don't know if there's been an employer that has raised this issue publicly, but I know that there have been some here that have made the switch. And then also toward the end of the Rooted in Rights video series, like in chapters like 5 and 6, I think, they interview and talk to a day program that used to run a shelter workshop and used to pay sub-minimum wage, but they made the transition to paying a full wages. So it can be done. And it's possible. We just need to find the political will and the advocacy to make it happen. And it can be done on the state level or on the federal level, because the 14C federal level, 14C certificates to the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act is the root of the sub-minimum wage. Like, it all stems from the 14C certificates to the federal law. But there's also a role for the states to play as well. The states can go along with the federal 14C exception, or they can say, no, we refuse to do that, and we will go above the minimum of the federal law and pay above minimum wage. The states can enact legislation or adopt policies that are more than the federal. They just cannot go below the federal level. Does that kind of make sense? So we have a couple of different options: federal level activity, state level activity.
Okay, thank you. Unless there are any final thoughts that you want to share, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I want to say thank you to you, Brad, for sharing that information and bringing awareness about those issues, and also to Edison for the information that he shared. And Kathy, unless there is anything further that you wanted to share, I think we're could probably. Did you want to share something else, Brad?
Well, I was going to say, if you wanted, I could show another section, another 5-minute section of the Rooted in Rights video, if you'd like, talking about how the transition from shelter workshop, sub-minimum wage, and those folks that have made the transition. If you'd like to watch that,
we do have the time. So if you think that would be helpful and you'd like to share it, sure, I think that'd be fine.
Let me flip over there and.
But only if you can get it to work.
Just make sure you share your video screen and then turn your volume up on your computer.
I will do all of that as best I can. All right, that's that. Now let me get to.
You got this, Brad.
Yeah, I'm working. I'll get it eventually. Chapter 2. Where's chapter? Okay. Right. With that. Yes. Oh, here it is. Okay.
A minimum wage is just that, the minimum any worker should receive.
Rooted in Rights' award-winning documentary, Bottom Dollars, exposed the unfair system that allow workers with disabilities to be paid less than minimum wage.
How would you like to go?
Brad, it's not showing and the sound is down.
I know.
Okay.
Let's see if we can go look at this one here.
Bottom dollars.
How do we change it?
Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act says that people with disabilities can be paid sub-minimum wage. We don't feel that's right. We feel our rights should be honored, just like every other population in this nation.
I'm Jensen Gerbello. I'm an activist for disability rights. Protesting isn't something that we do first. We always, take other advocacy avenues. Once we know that we're not getting anywhere, we organize actions, get in people's faces, and we let them know this isn't right. We're not going to stand for this. No pun intended.
Protesters hold up signs with slogans like subhuman, subhuman.
Let's see certificate under the Fair Labor Standards Act says that people with disabilities are less than everyone else. We don't deserve to get paid like everyone else. That's wrong. We have the power to make that change.
Painting on the side of a building in Tiffin, Ohio. Barbara Corner from Disability Rights, Ohio.
If somebody in a sheltered workshop or their parent or guardian wishes to challenge their wages, they can file a request with the Department of Labor.
Pamela shops for supplies.
We decided that we wanted to follow that process.
Pamela Stewart.
Judges ruling on our behalf, and he feels the same way we do, that we're being mistreated. I make minimum wage down. I'm happy about that. I want to be able to move up to where I'm getting paid really good.
Pamela threads a needle.
I'll have to go back to California. Not sure how much a plane ticket costs nowadays to go there.
Jim Larson from Morningside.
I really had a celebration. It was a trucker workshop. It was the second best day of my career. The first one was signing a letter back to the Federal Department of Labor saying, I choose not to renew the certificate. 2014, we stopped paying sub-minimum wages.
New Hampshire was the first state in the nation to eliminate sub-minimum wage for people with disabilities.
Charles Beeble walks in his white cane.
By the year 2020, Maryland is supposed to phase out paying sub-minimum wages to people with disabilities, blind people and such. And that's a good thing.
Stephanie Woodward.
A minimum wage is just that. The minimum any worker should receive.
Title: 48 states still allow sub-minimum wage. Gloria Marrero uses sign language.
Oh yeah, I want to earn more money. Well, sure. I'd like to have a little bit more money.
Gloria smiles. Joe plays a bell during church. LaRon Jackson.
After I got that check of $2.50 for working in a hot workshop with hot big fingers, I said I can go find me something else to do.
Teresa watches Dexter work. Cheryl Bates Harris.
If individuals are given the proper services and supports and proper assistive technology, the sky is the limit for many, many individuals.
Hugh Bertolin.
I mean, 959 hours. Now I get 4 weeks vacation. I get paid for my vacation.
Sarah Frost.
I want to move up more at children's in the receiving department.
LaRon drives his wheelchair through his office.
I went to school. I got my degree. I work with Disability Rights Mississippi. I'm an advocate for people with disabilities.
Trust Jones.
I've been working for 2 years. Had great internships and jobs.
Trust multiple his paycheck proudly.
And it's not just from me. It's not just from me, Trust Jones, who lives in the city. It's to every state.
Joe Bagwell. Sarah
to the northeast.
Dexter pushes hard.
Southwest. The Midwest.
Pamela sews.
I may have a disability, but I can still work.
Photo of President Roosevelt in a wheelchair.
I am still convinced that the American people continue to insist on sincere respect for the need of all people at the bottom who need to get work.
Sarah guiding a horse.
And through it, to get a really fair share of the good things of life.
Andy smiling at the bowling. Joe sees towards the camera.
And a chance to save and a chance to rise.
Share the full film in your community. Post a screening at bottomdollarsmovie.com.
All right, stop share.
And credits roll. Produced and directed by Jordan Villagrana.
Did you have any final thoughts you wanted to share about that, Brad?
Well, yeah, actually, I would strongly encourage you people to watch the series. The young man there you saw in the little clip was holding up his check. That was his interview is outstanding. outstanding. He gets a job at an auto dealership, helping with their Facebook and social media, right? And he, like I said, he had internships and jobs before, again, sub minimum wage, getting checks for like $2.50, right? He holds up this first check and he goes and announces it to the entire dealership that he got a real significant paycheck. It was amazing. Like his happiness at getting a real sized paycheck is I mean, if that doesn't get you where you live, then you got nothing here. Right. And the another interesting video or vignette on that in that series is the African American man who uses the wheelchair for Disability Rights Mississippi. You know, he was talking about how like they had him working in a hot sheltered workshop for hours, and he would get paid, like you said, a check for like $2.50. That's real, and that happens every day. To as rooted in rights, maybe in 2016, 200 some thousand people across the nation. But it happens today for at least 300 and some people here in Nebraska. And I think it's time that, you know, the state really, you know, rethinks and dismantles the structures that allow for persons with disabilities to be paid sub-minimum wage. And that's just wrong.
Okay. I think makes a good point too of just showing how much people really do want to work, regardless of whether they have a disability or not, and brings up some good points for just awareness or consideration in the discussions about sub-minimum wage and what that really means for people in the workshops. Not that anybody doesn't want the support and services available for individuals who need supports and services, but in a, you know, right kind of setting for them. So.
Yeah, and I know another great, really interesting vignette that I thought from this movie was there was a young man who works in a bookstore, but he doesn't have use of his limbs, and so people were all like, "Well, what job can you do?" Well, he scans books in for this nationwide bookseller, and has been doing it for at least a decade. I mean, he's been doing this job for a long time, but he has specialized equipment and assistive technology that allows him supports him to do the job that he's been assigned to do, and he gets a real paycheck. So I think, you know, kind of, you know, extending what you were saying, Shauna, and I'm glad you mentioned that, it does indicate this Rooted in Rights video series does not only expose the idea and gives you an understanding of the underpinnings that set up the sub-minimum wage, but I think it also demonstrates a couple of other things. What you were saying, Shauna, that people with disabilities want to go to work, and they often want to have a competitive employment, you know, a job. Second thing I think that it really highlights is that other piece that if you really think about it, and you really are committed to helping a person with a disability work and to be successful at work, it often or might take, you know, thinking about assistive technology. It might take thinking about how do we set up this person's schedule? What sort of do we need to, you know, is there someone that can kind of do some job coaching or, you know, again, people, you know, like Cheryl Harris was saying, the sky's the limit for many, many people with disabilities. If we can really think long and hard about what does this person need, what can we put in place to help this person succeed, to find the job, to land the job, and to succeed in the job. And I think if we can put those pieces together, along with the other piece that says we're not going to pay you less because you have a disability, then I think, you know, we can really get somewhere, and that would be a major improvement.
I think Eric Evans makes a point in his training that the Monroe Meyer Institute puts on, that poverty and disability have been tied since the beginning. And this is how it got to the point where you have to be impoverished in order to get services. You have to be impoverished and are seen as less than because you have a disability. It has nothing to do with anything about your productivity. It has to do with the decision years and years ago to link it to poverty.
Good point, Mary.
Yep.
Well,
And I think
I'm going to end it for today, but I want to thank everybody for showing up. We've had a lot of really good presentations this week. We went from where we are to where we could be if we just dream big. And we want to go out, we can change some of the bad practices that exist. And we all need to remember to vote, because voting is so important. How you make your voice heard. And on that note, I want to thank you again. And everybody have a great weekend.